The corporate matrix has sold you a pathetic, low-status lie called professional networking. They successfully conditioned you to become a professional beggar, chasing business cards at pretentiously fake corporate cocktail parties and collecting useless digital handshakes on LinkedIn. They told you that who you know matters more than what you know, to keep you dependent on their social hierarchies. But let's strip away the corporate delusion. Currency attracts currency, and weakness attracts exploitation. If you do not possess raw execution leverage, unassailable competence, and absolute market value, your network is nothing but a crowd of average people desperately trying to exploit one another. Elite 1% does not waste their prime hours networking. They build themselves into such an independent, powerful monolith that the gatekeepers are forced to hunt them down. Here's why your obsession with connections is keeping your average. Modern networking strips an individual of their inherent dignity, turning high-potential professionals into corporate beggars who trade their self-respect for transactional attention. When you enter a room full of strangers with the sole intent of collecting business cards, you are operating from a baseline of absolute scarcity. You are implicitly announcing that your current output is insufficient to command respect on its own merit. So you must beg for institutional proximity. This submissive dance forces you to adapt your personality to fit the comfort levels of legacy gatekeepers. You laugh at unfunny jokes, agree with outdated strategies, and slowly dilute your unique competitive edge just to remain palatable to a network. This psychological degradation doesn't build power, it conditions you to accept a subordinate position within someone else's hierarchy. By chasing connections, you validate a system that prioritizes political compliance over raw economic value. Escaping this submissive loop requires transitioning entirely away from social desperation and toward the cold, unyielding currency of competence. In the modern economic ecosystem, digital handshakes and superficial business cards possess zero transactional value when an industry crisis hits. True leverage is never built on who smiled at you in a corporate lobby. It is forged through unassailable high-status execution that solves complex problems with absolute precision. When your skill set becomes undeniably elite, the entire dynamic of professional relationships flips. You no longer need to navigate bureaucratic social circles because your raw output speaks directly to the bottom line of the market. Competence eliminates the need for political validation, allowing you to bypass the traditional gatekeepers who use networking to camouflage their own lack of real skill. Choosing to invest your prime energy into refining your operational leverage replaces fragile connections with unbreakable market power. When you lack this raw operational leverage, you inevitably fall into the blind peer trap, where networks of average individuals mutually assure each other's lifelong mediocrity. The modern workforce is obsessed with building large networks, completely ignoring the fact that a massive web of dependent, low-value connections only multiplies your own dependency. When you surround yourself with corporate mid-wits who are also struggling to survive the matrix, you are simply pooling collective anxiety. These networks create a dangerous echo chamber where average benchmarks are celebrated as elite achievements. Your peers will subtly pull you back down to their speed because your sudden acceleration exposes their comfortable stagnation. They offer superficial advice and safe, traditional paths that protect their own fragility rather than fueling your structural ambition. True hypergrowth cannot be crowdsourced from a collection of compliant assets. It demands isolating yourself from the noise of the average. Breaking free from this collective stagnation allows you to deploy asymmetric gravitation, shifting your focus toward building a monolith asset that gatekeepers are actively forced to hunt down. Instead of wasting energy pushing yourself into exclusive circles, you focus entirely on making your personal enterprise an irresistible force of nature. When you achieve this level of specialized dominance, you generate an intense strategic gravity that warps the market around your timeline. High-status entities and industry leaders stop looking down on you as an applicant. They look up to you as a solution. This systemic shift transforms you from a disposable candidate seeking a favor into a rare, sovereign entity holding all the leverage. By refusing to play the traditional submissive game of networking, you force the gatekeepers to abandon their arbitrary metrics and approach you strictly on your terms, eliminating the need to ever ask for permission again. This natural gravity completely exposes the LinkedIn illusion, shattering the hollow metrics of pretentious digital clout that the matrix uses to pacify the modern professional. The digital networking landscape has engineered a hyper-fragile ecosystem where corporate titles, toxic positivity, and meaningless endorphins are traded like real economic currency. Ambitious individuals waste hours crafting safe, sanitized narratives, celebrating lateral promotions, and praising corporate overloads just to trigger an algorithm that feeds their ego while starving their bank account. This manufactured performance creates a distorted sense of progress. You feel like an industry player because your network count increases, but your true economic sovereignty remains entirely unchanged. The matrix weaponizes this digital validation to keep your energy trapped within their sandbox. True market power is never measured by the volume of superficial applause from people who wouldn't hesitate to replace you. It is measured by the real-world leverage you command over resources, capital, and execution timelines. While the compliant masses spend their nights curating a flawless, sterile profile to please HR algorithms, the independent player acts in the shadows, entirely unconcerned with public optics, focused solely on building immutable wealth. Once you've pierced through this digital performance, you arrive at the final evolution of professional autonomy, sovereign domain capture, where you completely trade superficial connections for an absolute, unassailable market monopoly. At this level of master status execution, the very concept of networking becomes a laughable relic of a dependent past. You no longer operate within an existing infrastructure. You become the infrastructure itself. Your unique operational framework, hypervelocity processing power, and specialized mastery create a deep structural moat around your enterprise that no bureaucratic middleman can ever hope to penetrate. While the conditioned masses remain trapped in submissive defensive loops, clinging desperately to their digital contacts and relying on the fragile goodwill of legacy gatekeepers, you play an entirely offensive game of total territory conquest. Your systemic refusal to participate in the fake camaraderie of corporate networks allows you to preserve your peak execution energy, channeling it exclusively into capturing high-value assets and establishing total control over your economic destiny. True financial sovereignty is never birthed from a mutual agreement among average peers. It is violently seized by the independent individual who commands the fire of their own structural urgency and renders the entire social hierarchy completely obsolete. By choosing raw, isolated power over hollow connections, you permanently elevate your personal status above the systemic noise, transforming your personal execution into a sovereign empire that dictates its own terms to a market that has no choice but to comply.